So there's two parts, obviously, to a multiple choice question. There's the stem, which is the first part where there's a statement of some kind, and then there are options, and within these options there is a correct answer and multiple distractors. So we're going to think about 9 general guidelines for developing good questions, and at the end I'll give you just a few references if you would like to look into any of this in more detail. So starting with the stem part of the question, we want to write the stem either as a very clearly articulated question or a problem or some kind of a task. We want to put as much information into the stem part of the question as possible, keeping the options as short and concise as possible. And I will show you an example of that later on. But what we're trying to do is have all the information that the student needs in the stem, and then as they're considering their options, they can work their way quite easily through these shorter answers and keep everything in their working memory quite effectively. So in that stem, although we want to put as much information as possible in there, we want it to be as specific and clear as possible for the task at hand. Not lots of extraneous information. Now that said, always bearing in mind what your objective is for having the question in the first place. You might have a question that is set up in such a way that you need the students to be able to look at a lot of information and pull out from that only the information that is relevant. I do that with physiology problems all the time. So again, depending on what your objective is for having the students answer this question, please do feel free to put extraneous information if that is something that you're trying to get your students to practice being able to discriminate amongst. One thing that we do want to avoid is unnecessary use of negatives if at all possible. Sometimes they are important, and by all means use them if that's appropriate to your course, but please make it as obvious as possible. What we want is to have a test, as we said before, that is valid and reliable, and that the student's grade accurately reflects their knowledge, so that they either get the question right or wrong because they knew or didn't know the material, and not because during a stressful moment in a test their eye flew over the word not. So if you're going to use not, then highlight that, bold it, and then the student is still able to show you whether they know the answer or they don't. The 5 remaining rules refer to the options. And this part I think is really important. We really do want to avoid the jokey example at the beginning of the presentation of having A, B, C, A and C, D and F, etc. And we want to avoid having 2-part answers. And of course, we need to have at least 3, sometimes 4 plausible distractors. Now, the reason for avoiding having multiple answers or 2-part answers is, again, we are trying to avoid the type 2 error of students not getting points when they actually did know the material, or at least they knew some of the material. And so having only one correct answer means that they got it right or they got it wrong based on their knowledge. And that while having multiple correct answers or multiple parts to an answer, yes, we're going to find the students that don't know the whole thing, but we are penalising them when they did know some of the material. So we recommend not doing that if you can possibly help it. You want to write the correct answer with no irrelevant or obvious clues. And one thing that we see a lot, and I have to watch myself often for this, is that I tend to write the correct answer more eloquently and perhaps even in a longer way than all the wrong answers. And so that makes it jump out. So when you are doing your distractors, you want them to look as similar as possible in the way in which they're written, not have the correct answer longer or shorter than all of the other ones. You want them all to be well written, and you want to not have silly obviously wrong gimmies is what we call them sometimes, and sometimes you do that because you just cannot think of another one, and that's fine. But really trying to think back to what you know are the most common misunderstandings in your class, and then have your distractors focus on those. And again, you want to avoid all of the above, none of the above distractors for all the reasons we've already discussed. And you want to be careful that your alternatives and the correct answers are as distributed as equally as possible through A through D or A through F. Research shows that when students don't know the answer, they often guess C, and that actually often the way we've written our test, C is the correct answer. And so write your questions and put your correct answer wherever you want it to go, but then come back and make sure that they're nicely distributed among all the options, so that the students aren't just guessing the correct answer.